Добрый день, коллеги, меня слышно?
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I hope you can hear me. I hope my mic is working and you can hear me. We are beginning our session on the topic of development institutes and agencies of metropolitan areas. My name is Alexei Gutsev, and I am representing one of the development institutions. One of the development institutes, it's a Russian venture company. We are not directly involved in developing metropolitan areas and agglomeration, but for quite a long time we've been working with regional government and development agencies, so it's a hot topic for us. And before I'm introducing our respected speakers and our guests today who will be taking part in our discussion, I would like to share a couple of words of how and why at this forum I think this topic is of importance. The theme of our forum today is agglomerations. We've heard it on a number of times that agglomerations are in fact an avant-garde or forefront of the society's development, and it is in agglomerations that we see the concentration of human capital, financial capital, and where the new technological solutions are being invented and approved. Basically, this is the function of agglomerations or metropolitan areas. This would be the cutting edge of the modern world, and so the complexity that we have in this agglomeration is very, very big, both diversity and complexity. And when we speak about development agencies in Russia, we think that in many countries development institutes are not required because it's all solved through the invisible hand of the market or the, let's say, civil society and other invisible factors. But we, as Development Institute, we understand, no, it does not work like that. Speaking of such complex systems, as big cities and megapolises, it would not be possible. And I would like to begin with this statement, even though I'm a moderator, but I will try anyway, that in the modern big cities and complex societies, it would not be possible to work without development agencies and institutes. And I'm proposing not to discuss today what is the development agency, because each country have their own definitions, and I even guess like a Russian venture company may have one definition, our colleagues from Skolkovo fund may have a different definition, the Moscow government may have yet the third definition. What's important are functions or the roles which are played by development institutes, and I'm hoping that today's discussion will be about certain very important cases which will help us to understand of why do we need development agencies, what are the plans, and what is their role in the modern cities and agglomerations. So the members of our panel discussion today are very well suited for the subject, and they can share a lot, many cases and a lot of information related to the main topic. And here we have the Wang Dego, the Executive Vice President of the China Development Institute. We have Deborah Mountford, the Senior Analyst for Policies in OECD. Ilya Korivogov, the CEO of the Fund for the Mono Cities Development. Yuri Saprikin, the Vice President of the Skolkovo Foundation. Maria Yepifantsova, the Senior professional of the Republic of Tatarstan Information Agency, and Anton Arbuzov. Here he is, Anton Arbuzov, the Director of the Investment Agencies of the Komsomolsk-on-Amur City. Interesting case. And first I would like to give the floor to Mr. Wang Dego, the China Development Institute. We are used lately to the fact that China is one of the main leaders where Russia is looking at their development, because the pace of development demonstrated by China is absolutely fantastic. And What's more important in the context of what I have just said, that yes, the difficulty of developing Chinese megapolises due to its size, such as Shenzhen, where I understand for the most part Mr. Van der Goor will share us about the Shenzhen. There are many difficulties and complexities, and I think it's a main question of how you, as the China Development Institution for the Shenzhen over China, Zhongguo, are able to cope with the difficulties that you see in megapolises. Thank you, sir. The floor is yours.
The Chairman, I just come from China Development Institute based on Shenzhen. Shenzhen is a special economic zone, and also my institute is a think tank consulted for both the local government and the central government. And of course, Shenzhen is, because Shenzhen is close to Hong Kong, Shenzhen is not only a special economic zone, but also is a metropolitan area. And also now the population is more than 11 million people. And also the GDP grows each year nearly 9%. I'm sorry, I don't just transform the slider.
Помогите, пожалуйста, с кликером.
Could you please help us with the clicker, ladies and gentlemen? Somebody please help us with the clicker, or please switch the slides for our speakers. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, thank you.
It's very dynamic. Just the population, just more than 11 million people in there. I think just a little bit much more in Moscow. And also the GDP scale just close to Hong Kong. And also Shenzhen is a high-tech and innovation city. The PCT international patient appliance take half of the China's total amount. So the next slide. Yeah. So Shenzhen is as a special economic zone is now is a dynamic powerhouse of China, and also it's a lot of agglomeration of industry, such as the communication industries in there, internet industry in there. A lot of industries just agglomerate in Shenzhen. And I just want to give a case about Shenzhen Qianhai Shekou Free Trade Area. And also this area is consulted by my institute. That means my institute organization play a very important role in the specific agglomeration of the Shenzhen Qianhai Shekou area. Yes? Yeah, of course, as you know, in China, they have already established 11 free trade zones in China. First one is in Shanghai. Second one is in the Tianjin, Guangdong. Yeah, of course, Shenzhen is just belong to Guangdong province and also Fujian. Another third one is just inland of China. Yes. And also, of course, in Guangdong province, there are another 3 free trade zones in there, including Nansha and also Hongqing and also Shenzhen. These 3 ones is very important in Guangdong province. Yeah, so of course in Qianhai Shekou Free Trade Zone just have 3 parts. First one is just focus on the financial district. Second one just the logistic, because it's based on a port in there. Third one is just focus on the manufacturing cluster in there. Yeah, so yeah, the next one. Yeah, so the goals, the missions for the Qianhai Shekou Free Trade Area, just as an opening experimental area in China, and also as a producive service center in the Asia-Pacific region. And of course, as an international hub for the trade in service. And also besides, there's a very important emerging industry like financial and also logistic information service and also technology service in there. Next, thank you. Next one. Yeah, so we can see what is happening in this area. Half of them just financial service industry in there, and also including the logistics and also some high-tech service and also some manufacturing in there. Yes. So what is happening when my institute just involved in the desire for this area? I think very important for the national level government. In the national level government, they have to do three very important things in there. First one is the registration. Yeah, second one is about the specific policy, especially about the financial policy in there, and also the tax policy in there. The third one is, also the next one is about in the local level. That's very important about the reform of administrative examination and also such as the one-stop administrative service and the smarter tax payment and also the management. That's for the local government. And also we have desired some infrastructure investment and the construction for this area, such as the land supply and the auction is very specific for this area. Next slide. And also the legal system is very specific for this area, including some administration bureau and also about the court and also some intellectual property rights protection center in that. Yeah. So what is happening in this area? That means that there's very good incentives mechanism between the central government, state government, and the local government. So it has a very good stimulation for the local government to make a very big step under this area. So just 2 years, the FDI going up very quickly. Just last year, just more than 80% of the FDI, and also more than 50% and also more than 80% for the industrial value added and also local tax just going up very quickly. And also more than 95% of the industries clustered as an agglomeration and newly grows poor in this area. That's the story. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое, господин.
Thank you, Mr. Wandago, for your presentation. The question that I would like to ask you, thank you, sir. The question I would like to ask you, based on the very rich 30-year experience of developing Shenzhen as a special territory, I do not know how long your China Development Institute has been in existence. What kind of wishes, what kind of recommendations you could give to the Moscow Institutes of Development? Moscow is a big city. If we compare Moscow, we can see that Shenzhen has its own special features and distinctions, which makes it different from other megapolises. But still, is there something that you would like to formulate as the key lessons, key takeaways based on the Shenzhen experience and maybe experience of other China megapolises? Maybe also Beijing will be more relevant as a political center for Moscow. Thank you.
So I just would like to just have 3 ideas about Moscow's development comparison with Shenzhen. First one, I think Shenzhen's experiment for the special economic zone is a very important policy issued by the central government, by the state government. That means some specific policy could be as an experimental test in this area. That's very important for Moscow if the state government give some specific rights to have a test in this country. For example, some customer tax policy, specific policy in there. For example, some specific policy for the financial policy in there. I think that will be very most abstractive for the foreign investment. Secondly, I think it's very important for the cooperation between the national level government and also the local government. That's very important. If the local government don't have the incentive to develop the economy, that means a lot of things maybe just don't as a comparison for this area. So I think the incentive for the local government is very important. The third one I think is very important. That means more and more migration people should be just into the Moscow. I'm not sure about now, today, what about Moscow's situation about migration? But in Shenzhen, because just 30 years ago, Shenzhen is just a very small village. A lot of people just come from the other area, such as in Sichuan province, Jiangxi province. A lot of people just come here. Just 30 years, the population increased very quickly. So a lot of factors based on the labor intensive and also then the capital intensive, then high-tech industry in there. So I think these three experiments maybe could be as experimental area for Moscow. Thank you.
Спасибо большое. Нам, конечно, было бы...
Thank you very much. Would also like to get more experience of China, of how China is managing this phenomena of rapid growth. Questions later on. Please leave them until the end. We will take the questions closer to the end, even though Mr. Wang Dego unfortunately will leave us in 20 minutes. But now we are not making it on our schedule. I'm sorry, I cannot stop. So now we have to go to our next presenter. We have a very integrated look on the side of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. And I remember the English abbreviation OECD, but I do not remember the Russian version of OECD abbreviation. Deborah Mountford. Dear Deborah, would like to give you the floor, and actually the question is about the same, the one that I've answered to Mr. Guo. This is about those conclusions or outcomes based on your research of different institutions of development from different countries. What kind of takeaways, what kind of recommendations would you give to Russian development institutions, not only to Moscow, not only to urban, but also to federal development institutions, regarding of how can we manage the ever-growing complexity of challenges and tasks and economics and society? Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for this invitation to come here today. At the OECD, we have, as a post-Second World War institution, we've taken the issue of development agencies quite seriously. And I won't rehearse their historic trajectory and why they are important in some countries, and in fact all countries, and you can follow them through the different economic challenges that the world has faced. But I think it is important to say that why we think they matter and why they will always remain an important driver of growth for subnational economies is that they are quite distinct from the other functions that metropolitan or regional governments have to follow. They require a different set of understandings and different actors involved in it because they are the one tool that you have, or that subnational governments have, that is a direct interface with the private sector. They are outward looking to the private sector, and quite often, even though they are an extension of subnational government or even national government, the ways in which throughout the globe, as we've looked at them, they are set up in an enabling way to ensure that actually they become an important development and investment partner. And that means that one of the ways in which they can operate most successfully is that they respond to the opportunities of the market. They work on evidence. They work on being able to create the right tools and investment strategies for a regional economy or a metropolitan economy. And one of the reasons why they work so well, if we're thinking about agglomerations, is that they are not tied to boundaries. They work across the economic geography, not the political geography. And that is particularly important. And increasingly what you see when you go to international investment events such as MIPIM in Cannes, which is held on an annual basis, it's the development agency that is there representing the territory, that has that fluency of language with the private sector that really is about taking an economy forward. Because what they can do by sometimes taking land assets, they can build on that value capture, they can ensure that the maximum return for investment takes place, and that an economy can actually start to plan in the longer term without being subject to elections and the fragility of which the political dimension of local government can bring. And by allowing a development agency to be sufficiently arm's length, it can give it that resilience as to how the economy moves forward. They're also run differently. They're not run like local government. Whilst they have boards, whilst they're accountable, they actually do have that business approach. They're also dealing with different spatial scales, different time scales, and because of that, they are a really important tool for how you take your economy forward, whether it's looking at skills, whether it's looking at the human capital dimension, or whether it's looking at actually the physical assets that a territory has. What we have found, certainly when we did this piece of work, it's a big beast of a book, but it's 16 development agencies of different typologies and different scales across OECD member and non-member countries. And we looked at them as to how they fitted into the local economy, what they mean, how they work, why they can operate often at a national scale and an international scale in a way that local governments can't. So conscious of time here and conscious of the and other speakers that have to participate in them, I think from our perspective we see them as an absolute key partner and key driver of local growth.
Thank you very much. Да, спасибо.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you. If I may, one question I would like to ask you. Unfortunately, I do not know, have you been studying only OECD in your research? And if you've studied other countries, experience of what countries in their cooperation between the governments and development institutions and maybe local businesses you think is more relevant for Russia? Based on your experience, this would be Asian tigers, or would they be continental Europe, or maybe Brazil or other external countries beyond the scope of OECD? I do not know the scope of your research. That's why I'm just guessing. Thank you.
Of course, we always take OECD member countries as the basis for our work, but we ensure that we engage and we look at what is happening beyond that membership, because at one point we don't know at what point that country may well become a member of the OECD. But also, I think what we see are, across the globe, there are common practices towards economic development and understanding how the different mechanisms work. For example, in this work, we also took in South Africa. I've done work in Latin America and work in Bogota, looking at Bogota Development Agency, and then in work there where we looked at economic strategies and investment strategies. Indeed, Shenzhen was one of our case studies in that process. So I think it's about what we look for is important and interesting practice that really can become relevant for the whole world, whether they are an OECD member country or not.
Все-таки, вот можете ли вы выделить какие-то практики?
Could you specify some practices which were on particular interest for Russia? Because we've looked at different experience, but which experience do you think Russia could use? What could be relevant for Russia as you see it?
I think, are we talking Russia or are we talking Moscow? Because if you're thinking about, Russia, it is such a diverse country that I think you would have to look for comparable models as you were thinking about Moscow, for example, in that global city capacity. Now, how Paris Île-de-France has a regional development agency. Its agency plays a critical role in taking that economy forward. If you look at the New York Development Corporation, the Development Corporation and what that agency does within that economy is a critical factor. Now, you can go to more regional areas and a more rural perspective where you have development agencies that cross over from that urban to that rural dimension. They're going to be as relevant for Russia as they are anywhere, because that's about good economic development practice. That's about creating a context for growth context for inclusive growth, context which creates jobs, which puts human beings at the heart of a growing economy. These issues are no different in Russia and no less valid and important in Russia, I think, than they are anywhere else. So the same investment challenges, people are chasing the same money, whether they be in Russia or whether they be in a European city. The fact is that there is an awful lot of investment money. I think one of the figures I heard from the private sector was between 2015 and 2020, $1.3 trillion of real estate money will go into cities. That's cities across the globe. That's well-run cities. That's functional cities. And so you're competing in a global marketplace. Every city is competing in those global marketplaces. So having the right toolkit and the right actors to take that forward, that's how you will attract the investment.
Спасибо большое, госпожа Дебра. Теперь, мне кажется, стоит перейти.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Now I would like to get to Russian service. And we know that during other sessions, there was a survey presented on behalf of Russian Urban Forum, and this is a survey on agglomerations and institutions for development. Alexei Kupriyanov will share with us his vision and the results of this survey. Well, Bulat Stolярov is the name on the PowerPoint presentation, but it is not me, but my colleague. We've participated in some regional institutes for development on the one hand. On the other hand, we try to get introduced with agglomerations and we conduct analysis. So let me share with you our experience of studying agglomerations and setting up regional institutes for development. Well, number one, idea of mine is quite simple. Cities now are most important drivers for development in the world, and about 80% of VP is manufactured and produced by and in the cities. And this is the trend which is going to develop further. More quality human capital will also further concentrate in cities. So they are drivers of the international economy as well. They've passed different stages of evolution. You can see City 2.0 is an industrial city where manufacturers and factories are concentrated. This was the City 1.0. What is the City 2.2? It is more concerned with small and medium-sized businesses, but our target is the City 3.0, is the center of people, of education, of skills, and this is what I have today. Let us see the structure of the biggest international cities. This trend is reflected there. So about 2% of the GDP of London is industry. There are also other points of view. Some say that industry will come back to big cities, but we don't have anything supporting it so far. And in big cities today, other competencies are more important as finance, skills and knowledge, but not industry. This makes a challenge and different challenges concerning the environment. The whole city should change. So the new cities of today, they need redevelopment for making environment for developing, so that the human capital feels comfortable. Redevelopment can be different. And here there are different examples. And we can see that instead of centers for industry, we have museum clusters as well as business clusters and educational clusters. In the world, a lot of experience has been accumulated in different ways of city development, and I will share it with you a bit later. Yes, Alexei, could you please focus on the state institutes and institutions for development? Because this is what Deborah Mountford and Van der Goor has spoken about too. Well, let me bring about an institute for city development. In Barcelona, such an institution was set up. What did they do? Of a coastal area which was in a very bad condition, they developed it into a quality and cluster for living and creating. So they managed to attract both national, municipal, and also private investitions for redevelopment. The same kind of thing was in Buenos Aires. So they started redevelopment of depression territories. They attracted more than $2.5 billion of private investitions. Interesting is that was the period of general crisis in Argentina. So the private business, together with the national support, they managed to combat this crisis. Another interesting example, and this is London. London Legacy Development Corporation, especially does the Olympic Park development. They also managed to attract funding, thus balancing different types of real estate and preserving the cultural component, which is most important. Let me specify why this corporation was set out. Well, in London, not the central government, but the municipal government has a lot of power for local development. If you want to make some redevelopment, you've got to set up an organization linking all the boroughs, these special organizations, and this is what they managed to do successfully. Beijing, and is another brilliant example. And it figures out, like Beijing Capital Group, the national institution, they attract private capital. So they were set up like groups, more than 150 organizations. They were not linked together. And thus, they wanted to create a company linking them. So you can see that the assets of Beijing Capital Group have increased 30%. So they also have subsidiaries. They share. They have shares, and they sell their shares in their subsidiaries. And this is like municipal bank, which develops the mega region of Beijing and plays the major role in the development of Beijing infrastructure. In Moscow, we also have very good examples, quite successful ones. For instance, Zil, the peninsula, was fulfilled without a cooperation. So there was a competition, and a developer, a private investigation, was selected. The project was successful, but it was long. Maybe that was the reason why corporations for development should be set up on the city level. Speaking about other Russian cities and towns, there is one problem for the majority of them. What does it mean? There is a group of industrial objects and facilities which are not used, and that is why we have like urban sprawl. So it means that the city itself develops, but this former industrial area does not develop. These are places where there were industries during the Soviet Union. And this is a problem today. We cannot combat it. We can discuss why the market mechanisms do not work. Well, there are many arguments. There are a lot of owners. There are other hindrances. But this is why we really need city drivers to drive and to push these processes. Even in big cities, there are areas which really need quality redevelopment. Speaking about institutes for development, we have branch institutes and institutions as foundation for industrial development. They are focused on development of some specific industries and branches. There are other institutions which focus on development on some particular areas and some particular regions. They have both administrative resource and they also have money. But there are not enough of them. And very often they really have budget limits. They have some millions rubles, and that is all. And they cannot have enough impact for sustainable and rapid development of the cities. Why and what for do we need these city institutions for development? This is the matter of competence on the one hand and speed on the other hand. For redevelopment of bigger territories, you've got to have vision to attract investors and to accumulate all this together. Who can do it? The institutes for development, like Land Development Corporation, can do it. And that is why, as we see it today, Russia does not highlight enough the development of the cities, and there are not enough instruments for that. And that is why the status quo remains as it is. Unfortunately, our cities will not be drivers for economic developments. They could be, and they are not developing fast enough. Thank you, Alexei, very much. Let us leave this slide. And there is a very important idea here, and I would like all other speakers to comment on it. So, number one point, to include quality development of the cities in top 5 programs for development. Top 5, I really liked it. We have a very good program for university development. Top 5 Russian universities should be among top 100 international universities. This is really important for the Russian government to develop universities and to make them among the tops. Maybe you have any similar questionnaires concerning city development. Yesterday, Mayor Sobyanin also highlighted some points where Moscow is number 1 in the world. Digital service and innovational infrastructure are the areas where we are among the tops. And maybe this kind of target setting could be helpful for Russian cities and towns. And Alexei, is a question for you. You've been working a lot with our government, city government. I asked our Chinese guest about Shenzhen and the experience which should be useful for Moscow. And now a question for you. Will this survey have any practical application for the Moscow city government and for the policy of our Moscow city government? Well, I hope so. Besides analytics, we are now preparing a number of projects. Could you bring about an example? Well, this will be announced later. I cannot, sorry. But speaking about the target, we oriented agglomeration projects as well as projects of public-private partnerships where the risks of investors can be shared. Now I'd like to give the floor to a person who represents one of the mega projects of Russia. They have results and they have plans for the future. And that is Skolkovo. And we have today Vice President of Skolkovo Foundation, Yuri Saprikin. Yuri, the floor is yours. Could you please share how you managed to achieve what you have achieved? Also, please cover this issue of making cities tops in the world. Maybe this sounds strange for you. If yes, then say if it is. And one more question concerning expansion of Skolkovo experience to other cities. Let's start from the simplest thing. Thank you very much for your question. Well, the fact that we are here in this forum, it is the answer to your question. If the city development should be targeted at being the tops, it is important. That is why we are here. Speaking about Skolkovo, our colleagues, the Institute for Development, to what category do you refer Skolkovo? As I see it, Skolkovo is symbiosis, so is some junction of the state cooperation. There are also startups. There are some other opportunities. For instance, some startups can be there and develop for a reasonable sum of money. Well, and that is not true, because Skolkovo is much more. Skolkovo is an institution for development. It is a small municipal city, 40 to 50 people being there daily. And the Skolkovo Innovation Center was set up for development. And this includes social infrastructure, architecture and design, transport, etc., etc. So where to go further? Skolkovo is not only the project which is localized in the Moscow area, and that is all. Within 5 years, we've got experience not only in working together with different companies. We have also a lot of experience of how to make a territory, an ecosystem to attract businessmen, to attract people, and to earn money too. And this is of paramount importance. Speaking about agglomerations and their development, I think that money, ability, and revenues are most important, especially for investors, because private investor is the clue figure there.
And lately, we have decided that the phone Skolkovo will be developing territorially. We're expecting some amendments in national legislation, but legislative process is underway. We're making attempts with a number of regions, or a number of Russian regions, to try to launch pilot regimes. And one practical example, you've been asking me about giving an example. It's one of our latest negotiations with the city of Chelyabinsk in Russia, one of the techno parks, which would like to become the consumer of the Skolkovo franchise and develop it in Chelyabinsk. They're looking into our experience not only related to working with companies and residents and our services, but also of how it should become some big story of developing Chelyabinsk greater area. And the main element of the techno inno park and a certain like an agglomeration which is related to innovations. Here in Skolkovo, we have the whole bunch of our colleagues who are involved in that. And Yelena Zelentsova, our vice president, she is also here today. She has extensive experience in working in Moscow. And when she took office, she brought in her competencies and quite a big work that is being done not only with the city of Chelyabinsk, but with other regions as well, is about to look into developing innovative infrastructure and techno parks, not only for the needs of the technological high-tech companies which are localized there. We also want it to become the part of the greater urban development, so that the local municipality would consider it not only as like a building and some young guys are trying to program in something or build the startups. And I think there is a long way to go, because not all the municipalities and those who are involved in developing territories are viewing development agencies as their partners. And I think we need to explain to them that we are not only to support a company or a number of companies, but we want these companies creating demand on the market and setting the bar high for their services, would thus build the future cities, look of the future cities, and attract investments in developing the cities of the future. Thank you, Yuri. And now I'd like to give the floor to Ilya Krivlugov, the CEO of the Foundation for Developing Mono Cities, or the Single Industry Cities. And here we have quite a big delta. On one hand, the forum is dedicated to agglomeration and metropolitan areas, but in Russia, one important topic of spatial development and economic development is the issue of mono cities or single industry cities, of how they should be developing in the future. Should they be developing as the separate municipality, or maybe some of them have to be the part of the larger agglomerations? And how should the migration happening between the mono cities and the metropolitan areas? It's a matter of balance of population, and of course the bigger cities are attracting people due to jobs available in them, and the mono cities have also been able to retain economic activity and retain people in them. Ilya, quite often you've been dealing with these issues in your profession. Could you please give us a comment? And also, given these complexities that Russia has with maintaining the balance between the mono cities, which is the heritage from the Soviet Union of industrialization, and the new growing centers, how are you planning to maintain this balance and maybe somehow differently to solve this issue? I would like to listen to you. Alexei, thank you very much. Oh, sorry. So I'm flying a lot, so I have my voice failing on me today. We also, as development institution, began as the investment fund, and now in Russia there are over 30 federal development institutions and about several hundreds of municipal and regional development agencies. We are dealing with infrastructure and investment of capital. We realized this is not enough for our cities. as it was mentioned, to become the cities 2.0, we needed some additional elements. First, education with the Skolkovo Business School, with the Russian Economic Academy. We have trained already 200 teams, mayoral teams of the mono cities, of the smaller cities. It's a modern education theory. It's not just a theory, it's applied MBA of how to attract investments and how to develop a town or a city. And the second part, of no less importance, we have launched as a priority. We've had 5 top priorities. We've launched a number of high priority projects, and as a part of our projects, we have the city development. It's creating public spaces, creating recreational areas, and the cities for life. And we decided to play on what citizens want, not what a mayor want. We've made a public polls. It was not easy to do, but we got the feedback of what our citizens would like to see. We're working with the OECD, with the European departments and some European countries, and we know that we also need to know what our young people want to know. They are the ones who will be living and working in these cities, in these companies. And whether they will stay in these cities and towns, it's a big question. So after a thorough analysis, we have launched a process of developing all the cities. It's unique to each city. This would be a different set of instruments and tools. And I think it is important when we have partners, when we work with corporations, with other development institutions, and we have a synergy effect based on such a participation. It's a totally different outcome. Had we done it alone, they would be on a very moderate level, on a smaller level. But we've launched this process of reloading these mono cities. We have quite an ambitious task, and a number of towns are close. We want to make our towns better investment points of investments, and I think development institutes are playing a very vital role here, as our colleague from China has left us, but it was a very important event that we are speaking the same language with investors. I think it's a key phrase. And the second one is that the federation, the state, is given a lot of powers on the regional and municipal level. If you do not do this, our development institutions are helpless. We've been bold enough. In the first couple of months, we've made a poll of all the development institutions of all these several hundreds of Russian mono cities, be it the small business development agencies and other development agencies. We came to a very sad conclusion. Number one, they're underfunded. Business does not know them. And number 3, they do not have a clear development KPI. They're more about investments. So the teams that we're training in Skolkovo, we also include in these teams development institutions both on regional and municipal level. And these are the people who will be running projects later. And if we ask the key question, do we need development agencies? Yes, we need them. Do we need to build the new ones? I guess we still have to work with existing ones. If we're speaking about the bigger cities, yes, the agencies for the city development are quite proactive and efficient. But I think this kind of agency should be built not only by municipalities, but with involvement of local business. Then they have this business component. If it's a municipality, you know, you gather together, you put the money on deposit, and you come. And I think in the most development institutes, this is how it's working. When you speak about the smaller towns, it's about regional development institutions which are very efficient, they're attracting investors, and working with industrial sites and promoting these sites and towns to a different level. One good example would be Corporation for Developing the Kaluga region, Republic of Tatarstan. They're working for separate cities, so the development agencies, we believe, are important, but they should be, again, business-oriented. They should be business structures with the KPIs and with a specific responsibility. Otherwise, it's just yet another, as we say in Russia, feeding trough, when there is no results, because we are working for people. Ilya, thank you. And I would like to, again, to ask this question that I began our deliberation with. If We take an example of the city of Moscow in the Skolkovo center. This is the experience of building leaders and concentration in resources, which Russia is lacking, frankly, concentrating resources on developing leaders. When I highlighted the item number 1, which Alexei had in his presentation, which is making it to top 5 list, I guess it's possible only for the few cities of Russia. What do you think? Probably you have this kind of, you see this kind of attitude and the mentality that the significant part of the development programs are aimed at leaders and leadership. How do you maintain this balance? Because mono cities and single industry cities, they cannot ever aspire to become the leaders of the urban development in our country. Maybe I'm mistaken, but this is what I'm seeing. Maybe quite the opposite. Mono cities, they have to be integrated to some kind of agglomerations and the metropolitan areas, and then they will be developing according to the focus on the leaders. As for agglomerations, yes, we do have these kind of projects. They've been born as a result of training. We've had interesting international experts from the UK, Germany, and the US sharing with us, and for a number of territories, Skolkovo, Donetsk, Zverevo. The mayor and the teams, they've identified themselves as agglomeration. I mean, out of several mono cities. I mean, it's not just a join into a bigger city like New Moscow. No. It's one of the options. The second option would be interacting with a big city. For example, Pervouralsk and Yekaterinburg that you've mentioned. If you have the high-speed rail connection, then the people are migrating. It's a pendulum migration. People go back and forth. Like people go to local commuter trains. There's a Lastashka train. People go from Tver to Moscow every day and back. And businesses moving out that way to smaller places because now the well-to-do people can go to the city of Tver and get their medical services way cheaper. There are different models for developing mono cities for them to become leaders. And some of the cities will become leaders. You need to include in them, as our Chinese colleague said, the Chinese investor came to the city of Chalny. We've taught the team, we built the infrastructure, we've connected business to all the utilities, and thus build the priority development territory with very preferential tax mode. And there was a key for the company to choose between the mono city and a different country. And in our work, we are always trying to attract not only our own Russian investors, but also work with Western investors, so that this element, it's about export and added value, would stay here in our smaller cities, because amid the limited demand, it's not always to find the products within the country. Can I ask you another probing question? This horizon of planning for your development institute for cities like Moscow, it will be a very long planning horizon, or for any bigger city, because you have a lot of processes which are quite long in nature. But in smaller cities, like you said, you can think about being a part of a local agglomeration or to be a part of a local business, and in the latter case, probably planning horizon should be less. Could you please comment just how big are your plans, how well in advance you're looking forward and planning? Again, based on the international experience, Torino was the mono city. There was an oil in place. Now it's a famous tourist location, education location for the World Bank Group, where all the people are studying. But again, this process took many years, not even 5 years, but many decades. So our priority project, which have been approved by the president until 2025, we are analyzing best mono cities and how this mono addiction is decreasing, like it's 1 or 2% per year that this mono component, mono dependency is decreasing. But if you're working steadily, it's a very slow process. Thank you very much. And now I would like to give the floor to Anton Arbuzov, the representative of the development agency of one of the mono cities. And I would say it's not an easy case. It's a Komsomolsk-on-Amur. It's the city of presidential focus. That's the program. And we, of course, understand that there are many difficulties in developing because you're very far away from Moscow and the issues of building human capital, etc. Can you please share us how do you overcome challenges in Komsomolsk-on-Amur? And I would like to forward you the same question to Ilya about regaining the balance. Well, you do not have bigger cities like Khabarovsk, probably is not big enough to be an attraction, to be a magnet, but maybe you are thinking about connecting yourself to other towns or places. And maybe you could make an agglomeration with another place 400 kilometers away, like the city of Khabarovsk. Alexei, thank you for your invitation. Because I'm representing the far east of Russia in those unique municipal level development agencies which have been mentioned in presentation. Many people confuse the regional development agency and municipal development agency. Komsomolsk and Khabarovsk, it's yes, they're 400 kilometers apart, but Moscow and Komsomolsk, our city, is 8,000 kilometers. I'd flown into Moscow this morning. It's a good coffee, but I'm still asleep because the time difference is 8 hours. I feel sleepy. Speaking about our municipal institutes, they are not that many. It's a city of Cherepovets, Komsomolsk-on-Amur, and the nature of our development agencies is quite interesting. They're basically second towns of the regional center, because you would think that city of Khabarovsk is a regional center, living quite well, doing well. They have the Regional Development Institute, they have the notion of regional policies, but speaking of municipal institutions, they're not given such a status, so we have to grow on our own as an agency, as institutes, which have to attract into our territory investors so that these cities would not die out and wither. I would like to say that the basis of our work, of our municipal institutes, are practices of feed, the best municipal practices. You know, the name of our development institutes is it's a development and investments. We're trying to attract investments of the local business. We are also promoting territories, and the framework of our competences is that we know our business quite well. We are quite efficient on our own territory compared to the regional development agencies which potentially could come as our investors. And it looks like we're somewhere in between a regional agency and the great foundation of supporting mono cities in Russia, and there is such a middle layer of the second-tier cities, if you will. And I would like to say that, answering to your statement, do we need this kind of agencies? Yes, we need them. We need to combine under some umbrella. We need to be strengthened up. We need to be empowered. It's a subject for discussion, and I think, you know, I came here because I consider this to be a very unique platform where the reps of such institutions could talk about our further development. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I think that maybe towards the end, not only I, but somebody else will have questions, and people may have some questions just at the end of our discussion. And with this, I would like to give the floor to Maria Yepifantsova, the representative of the Republic of Tatarstan, Russia, one of the fastest growing Russian regions, where, however, they have their own agglomeration in the city of Kazan. You have it, I mean, to a certain degree you can call it agglomeration. You have 3 agglomerations, even 3 of them.
But you also have mono cities, right? So you can cover all the issues we've covered today. Marina, the floor is yours. Could you please share the experience of Tatarstan concerning institutions for development? And could you please comment and answer the questions I used to ask today? Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me here. I can see there are not so many of us, but we are specialists and we are involved in this issue. Very often during our meetings, I can hear about the unique experience of Tatarstan, but people also say that it is not applicable to other cities because Tatarstan is specific. So let me bring about the example of 3 agglomerations. I also invite all of you to our booth where Kazan, Kan and Almaty agglomerations are represented. So we have the strategy for development until 2030 in the Republic of Kazakhstan. Leontiev Center has done it, and they have highlighted that the big city of Kazan exists already, but they wanted to make not 1 but 3 polars and centers for development in the Republic. Набережные Челны is my native city, and it is one of the cities which has been discussed today. Here, yes, we've done something, and we can share it with you. China is a great example. And we are a good example too. For instance, in our republic, investor can have some privileges. For instance, it gets to the platform of special zones like Labuga, or it can use another facility, a platform, or it can be part of the investment memorandum of Tatarstan, or this new scheme, TASAR, and the hire has already got preferences on investment memorandum before joining TASAR. So, but one thing, insurance privilege, but that was only one extra point for advantage. I mean, so the investors can have different privileges. They had all the business plan. They had all the program worked out in detail, and that is why it's been easier for them to join it. I would also like to specify one thing. Agglomerations, all of them have their own way. Kamska agglomeration highlight medicine and education. This has been historically part of that cluster. Kamska, where my native city, Nabережные Челны, which is a monocity, is. But there is a center for oil production not far from that. And Oil and Akam, another institute for development, is also part of it now. So oil production is another target and another feature for agglomeration development. I used to live in different towns. One of them is Zelenogorsk, which is also part of one of the 3 agglomerations. It's a very nice and green area. There used to be factories, but they no longer operated. I worked there 10 years ago. Those factories never worked, and they don't work now. They don't operate. But what we did is a technological park, and that seemed to be enough for the city. Very often we have meetings of municipal authorities, and we go on working together, monitoring each and every individual agglomeration. We are an agency, and we need to attract investment. It is our business, actually, and we need to figure out who wants to invest. You've said that the experience of Tatarstan is unique and cannot be copied, but maybe something can be copied or shared still, because we don't have much time, sorry, and we need to have some time for question and answer session. Well, let me only finalize my idea concerning our collaboration with our municipal authorities. So we keep asking them, let's think how and where we can attract investors. And they say, we don't need other investors. We are happy with what we have. We do agriculture. We have a program for development for local entrepreneurs. They are part of it. And if you want to invest into oil and gas plant or factory, we'll say no, because we don't want to develop like this. So it's most important, if you want to develop, to consider the point of view of the citizens, of the people who live there, where to develop, where they want to develop. So we have some targets and points for agglomeration, and this is how we work. There are 5 municipal areas in the Republic, and the President of the Republic had a decree to set up at least one platform for development. They've done it, and they all go their own way. Some produce polymers, and this is the cluster where they work. Some other do agricultural cluster. So is it a kind of micro-regional specialization? Well, it is. And it is the balance of historic, geographical, and some other aspects. This is what predisposes how the area needs to be developed. Well, we can do something using the force, but why and what for? Areas they, attract what they really need. We see what we have, and on the basis of this status quo, we develop the area further. Thank you very much. First and foremost, I would like to ask all of you, maybe you have questions, please? Are there any questions? Okay, great. Into the microphone.
Я бы хотел бы спросить.
Представьте.
Could you...
Пирогов Григорий, кандидат муниципальный.
Grigory Pirogov, applying for deputy of the municipal area of Kamovniki, Moscow. I would like to ask Deborah about how you see the local authorities. So what is in common concerning the budget and the methods of regional governing? You mean the institutes for development? Yes, I mean there are local institutes for development. What is in common everywhere in the world concerning instruments, concerning funding methods?
I think one of the things that, if you're talking about smaller agencies and really at that municipal level, they have the same challenges, but it's all on a micro scale, because one of the things that a municipally focused agency has to do is to work in perhaps a much closer way with the municipality and with local elected officials, because everything is going to be interlinked together, and you're really going to have to think about understanding the development plan, and you'll probably know your business sector and your private sector in a much more intimate way. But I think quite often the challenges are pretty much the same as to why development agencies are used as a vehicle. And I think every intervention along this panel, and I've said the same, development agencies respond to some kind of shock, some kind of crisis, some kind of issue at hand that the market itself isn't quite capable of dealing with, and neither is the way that local government, municipal government is organised. Land often lies at the heart of it. And if we're thinking about former industrial sites, and I had the privilege back in 2009 to do some work with Lukoil, talking about mono industries and looking at these one industry towns and cities that you have. And land ownership, land contamination, land reuse, these are often commonalities that you can look across the world, whether it's the Torino example was something that was mentioned earlier. I had the privilege to work with Torino to look at that, how you take a city from losing 100,000 blue-collar jobs into becoming the modern city, the different city that it is today. And I think a common theme, you're standing as deputy, one of the things that I am a passionate believer in, and all of the work that I've done at the OECD for the last 20 years, is that local economic leadership lies at the heart of all of these activities, and it's how the agencies are run, how the cities are taken forward. But that interreaction, it isn't just elected leaders, it's business leadership, it's institutional leadership. And so those are your commonalities that you see wherever you are, and they are the same. Where it doesn't matter what country and geography you're working in, they are different for sure. But I think understanding those aspects is perhaps one of the most useful strengths.
Спасибо большое. Еще вопросы? Да.
Thank you very much. More questions? I have a question to Mr. Saprikin. Thank you very much, Deborah. I'm an engineer and I do research in the Academy of Science. Okay, let's consider Skolkovo as one of the instruments for development. How do you see whether it is efficient or not, providing costs and preferences it had and the outcomes, so advantages and disadvantages, the costs and the targets? Because for me, the costs are much more and have been much more than the advancements. And what do you think about it? Number two question. Innopolis, as I see, is an ambitious plan. Is it a question to Marina now, to you? Innopolis has been inspired by Skolkovo and is headed by Skolkovo. How can you assess the opportunity of its development, how far it can develop? Because it's located far away from everywhere. I think that sometimes it's not efficient enough, and RBK, the media, they had some survey about its being inefficient. Well, I would like to commend Marina on Innopolis, because it's the face of Tatarstan. And that is why I would like both of you to answer this question. Let me start from Innopolis. I would not like to comment my colleagues and their project. On the other hand, from Skolkovo, I can see and I can admit that it is a very good project, and it is good it has been inspired by us. Certainly there are advantages and disadvantages. I would not like to comment on the survey done by the journalists. I think my colleagues from Kazakhstan will comment on it. Speaking about costs, do you know everything about the costs for Skolkovo? Do you know the figures? Because there are different figures, you know. Very often I have to answer this question. Let us subdivide two costs. Some costs go to infrastructure. How can we assess how efficient the costs for hospitals, universities, etc. are? That is why the costs for construction, well, I think they are good because these are the projects for schools, universities, and overall development. I don't think that can be viewed as disadvantage. Speaking about operational costs, our costs are measured and monitored by the government. We also have reports and all the figures are transparent. So what are the major indications? These are jobs, private investments, and you can see all this information, profit and revenue, and intellectual property subjects which are generated by these companies. If we have all these figures and we compare the overall investment and revenue, this is 90 million rubles, and this is comparable to the costs, you know. So again, I would like to subdivide the costs into up to the construction costs. This is the money which will remain because universities, etc., will develop. Operational costs is a different thing. Companies who came to us 5 years ago, having several IT people, and that was all. Now they are international companies, and they are well known and have money. You've specified preferences and tax preferences. Let's be pragmatic. I don't know, again, whether you know the figures. Sometimes our Ministry of Finance say, we've given preferences to you, but we could earn more money. But again, we do much more concerning revenue. Ministry of Connection and Mass Media, they give some tax preferences. Ministry of Finance complained, and they keep complaining, but if you see the direct figures and not the journalists of RBK survey who do not always cover the figures, I think that your conclusion will be much better. Thank you, my dear colleague. This is what I just wanted to say once again. That article concerning that, so to say, survey is a kind of a scandal-like yellow paper article. Because, you know, when I went to Innopolis for the first time, I was kind of shocked. I loved it so much because I never had such terms for education. And the environment that they have is ideal for training and development. We had specialists from London coming to see us. You know, what did they say? They said, you know, guys, you have probably the most expensive training in the world. So the students are trained, but before they're trained, they are checked. So only best students are selected. Then best specialists and experts from different countries and different areas come to teach and train them. So it's a great structure. IT city built anew on the green field where nothing was before. There are shuttles going to and fro, and the city is now so that you can just live there and work there and study there and not leave it, because the whole infrastructure is really so convenient. I think it's a very good experience, and you know, it develops so rapidly. And if you go and see that university, you'll see those great IT students. You know, they are in the T-shirts and slippers. And this is how they go from their campus to the university. I understand I am not speaking about money now. I'm not speaking about money, but this is the environment. Yes, it is the environment. These are the conditions. We've created all this. We want to be the top, among the tops in IT development. We have a center for Sberbank there. Who else can have it? We can have it in Skolkovo. Yes, thank you very much. Being efficient or not efficient is a tough question. We highlight figures every time, but if you have private investments and we have more and more private investments, I think that supports some project being efficient. 70% of all the money are private investments, and it could never happen if the state had not said that that was its priority. So all the project is supported by the state, and the private business believes it and invests there. This makes a good combination, because otherwise we would never have anything like this. Thank you very much. One more important issue which was voiced in the previous session in autumn during the Open Innovation Forum. Our Chinese colleagues also shared some similar experience like this. And what was the conclusion? If there are questions whether the institutes for development are efficient, it means that they work, they develop, and they are efficient and effective. So if there are no questions, then it means they do not work. Any other questions, please? The last, probably.
Hello, I'm Vitaly Stepanov from the Agency of Industrial Development in the city of Moscow. Thank you. The question for who? It's a question to all the presenters. Could you please share your experience, and mostly question to Alexei Kupriyanov. And the question is very simple and very practical. What channels of investment attractment you think are most efficient in the current economic situation? Have you heard the question? I'm sorry, I did not hear the question. What channels of attracting investment would be most efficient amid the current economic environment? Well, we understand that now the Russian financial market is not doing its best. The banking financing is quite expensive also, and this is why we believe that the most interesting instrument could be the PPP, public-private partnership, although the legislative basis has been established for that. And we are seeing that the number of projects, of the PPP projects which are being put into practice, are counted not by hundreds, by thousands. This instrument is operational thanks to the Ministry of Economic Development efforts. And add to this another instrument, which I think is interesting, namely building public-private companies. They have such experience in China, or when a municipal or a state-run company is doing the market placements of their subsidiaries. It increases the transparency and also attracts investments. But again, since the domestic investment sector is not at its best shape, I guess public-private partnerships are the most interesting instrument indeed. Do I have any other speakers who would like to answer this question? I think many people have experience. Yes, please, Deborah.
I'm going to say something that isn't necessarily an instrument, but it's about something that we learned when I was doing a piece of work on looking at new growth and investment strategies after the crisis. And we tested the work out in Mitten in front of private sector real estate investors and developers rather than policymakers before we got our government to endorse the work. And we put out a survey, 2012, so the crisis, the effects of it are still ongoing. Why are you investing? What makes you invest? What are you looking for? Interestingly enough, and some of you may not like this, tax incentives for 380 significant real estate investors throughout Europe and the world weren't an issue. That isn't what they went for. What they went for and what they look for are value propositions, a real strategy that is about a longer-term investment proposal. They look for well-led and well-governed places. That, to the private sector, is worth more than a tax incentive. And I think these are some of the things that you need to think about. And it touches on the last two answers and the last question that we had. Some things might cost more at the outset, but if they are about building a longer-term, robust proposition for a place, then it's an investment that if you look at the impact of tax incentives and reductions in special economic zones over the long term, that might not be the most sustainable and value-added proposition for an area.
Да.
Yes, please. Colleagues, please, I would like to take advantage of that, answering your question about the channels of attracting investments which are deemed to be most efficient. Invest in the Komsomolsk, in our city. Yes, we have concessional agreements, we have PPP, we have COSER, but I know that I am losing to Tatarstan because they also have all of that. And I wish that in our city of Komsomolsk would have an offshore and you would not think about Tatarstan but go to Komsomolsk. And casino, casino in the city of Vladivostok, they have a casino. And of course, we are the unique zone. Come to us, please. Thank you to all the participants. Thanks a lot to all those who've stayed with us until the end. And before finishing this session, I would like to express one of my recommendation based on our discussion. First of all, I'm hoping that maybe the organizers will be able to compile most interesting outcomes or statements based on the Deborah's report about OECD. Maybe you'll use some cases from Tatarstan, Skolkovo, and other cities. Maybe you'll integrate all of that, all of these findings into a research, and the research in its turn hopefully will be perceived with a good measure of practical implementation by the Moscow government. And on a separate note, it's solely my opinion, I think the idea is indeed very interesting in terms of taking part of the Russian cities into top ratings to follow up on how regional development institutions are coping with the goal of developing these very territories, or either existing agglomerations or not yet agglomerations who they would like to be. Thank you.